Hello, and welcome to Cabinet Conversations. I am Erica Scott, the Artistic Programming Manager here at Ford's Theater. And if you are joining us for the first time, this is our live series exploring creativity, history, and leadership. You can learn more and explore our past programs by visiting our website at www.fords.org. For our returning audience, you may notice that I'm in a little different setup today. Today, I am joining you from Ford's Theater. As Cabinet Conversations and the Ford's Theater campus continue to grow, we hope to bring more conversations to you from our historic site. Behind me, oh, there we go, you will notice some familiar costumes. These are the costumes worn by our young company members in the Ford's Theater production of A Christmas Carol. But more on that later in the program. Right now, we are here to talk about a new play that is set to open here at Ford's Theater. In 2021, Ford's Theater established the Ford's Theater Legacy Commission, a new artist initiative to broaden the American theater canon and illuminate unknown and lesser known figures in American history by BIPOC artists and BIPOC playwrights. Last winter, we offered a first look at these new works, and we are thrilled to fully produce one of our inaugural works for the first time. We are set to open our 2023-2024 season with the world premiere of Something Moving, a meditation on Maynard by Pearl Cleage. In 1974, Maynard Holbrook Jackson Jr. became the first Black mayor of Atlanta, Georgia. His historic 1973 election brought together different communities in Atlanta with hope and vision for the future, all trusting that he was the right candidate for the job. Now, as we approach an election year, as skepticism and political division dominate our news cycle, we are eager to explore how everyday citizens can engage in our democratic processes and how our civic participation shapes our own local and national communities. Today, we welcome Pearl Cleage, Hilary Green, and Faedra Chatard Carpenter to Cabinet Conversations. Pearl Cleage is a playwright, novelist, poet, and political activist. Her plays and novels deal with themes of racism, sexism, feminism, and love. She is the Distinguished Artist in Residence at Atlanta's Alliance Theater. Dr. Hilary N. Green is the James B. Duke Professor of Africana Studies at Davidson College. Her research and teaching interests include the intersections of race, class, and gender in African American history, the American Civil War, Reconstruction, Civil War memory, the U.S. South, 19th century America, and the Black Atlantic. And Dr. Faedra Chatard Carpenter is a theater performance studies scholar, professional dramaturg, and cultural critic. Her research, writing, teaching, and creative activities are grounded in her advocacy for diversity, inclusion, and the cultural fluency within the wide range of institutional spheres. Welcome to all three of you. As a reminder to our viewers, we are taking questions on our social media platforms, so please feel free to submit those so that we may share your questions with our guests during the program. Okay, my first question is for Pearl. Pearl, as part of our commissions program, we gave all playwrights interested the prompt. Do you have a story about someone or something that hasn't been told? Can you tell us how you responded to that invitation?
I can. I had just realized right before I was invited to submit to think about this commissioning. I had just realized that it was 50 years since Maynard Jackson had been elected our first African American mayor, and I felt that I wanted to write something about that, but I hadn't figured out exactly what or how. And so I thought this would be a perfect place to explore a figure who was so pivotal, not only in the history of Atlanta, but also in the whole South and in the whole country in terms of the work he was able to do. So I asked the people at Ford's if 50 years counted as historic. Was that long enough for me to kind of say, yes, I will do it? And they said, that's fine. So I said, okay, I'm in. I would love to shine a light on Maynard Jackson, not only because he did so much for Atlanta, but because I think at this moment, he really makes us remember an election where we were optimistic, where we were hopeful, where we were united in the idea that voting could make a difference, that electing people could make a difference. And I think that this is certainly a time in American history when we need to think deeply about those issues again.
Yeah. Um, Hilary, you saw that we were doing this show about Maynard and you got real excited. Alex, my associate in education, was hosting a summer program, I believe, and you saw it. You were like, "Oh my God, I need to come." What about that made you excited? Like what fueled that excitement?
One of the things that fueled the excitement for me is I teach Maynard Jackson. He represents hope, especially during after the Black Power movement, civil rights movement gains, and the restoration of the right to vote. And he represents the promise of what it fulfilled of what those previous years of activism meant. But he represents a new hope, but also a new vision for Atlanta that was always known as the New South. And we always go to Henry Grady and a white man who implemented Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And we have now Maynard Jackson elected to one of the largest cities in the South, a black man with deep roots in the community who changed Atlanta, including the airport that we always fly through today. His expansion of that airport is showing his legacy. So I saw it as a way to introduce new audiences because my students, when I talk about Maynard Jackson and what he did to Atlanta, my students today have never heard of him. He
Mm.
does not get the same cultural currency and knowledge in the present, but his campaign built on hope, what he was able to do with bridging the gaps between former segregationists who very much had to grit their teeth when he came into the room. But if they wanted a contract, they had to work with him. And then also too, he united the city. Was he perfect? No. But I think in this era of an upcoming election and what he did and what he represented to get elected and to get reelected and sustain a community is something that we need to inspire people today. So that's what got me so excited when I saw the poster for this show.
I love that. I do. Phaedra, you are serving as our productions dramaturg. And that's really, really important, especially to a new work. It's important to all works. But I don't think that if you are outside of the theater world that you know what a dramaturg is. Even some people within the theater world don't know what a dramaturg is. And I would love if you could tell us a little bit about what you do and what that means for for the production overall. This one specifically, but any production that you may serve as a dramaturg.
Sure. So, right, a dramaturg, it's not always like what it is, but what they may do depending on the production needs. So, there's different types of dramaturgy. There's production dramaturgy, which maybe the playwright is not at all attached to Shakespeare. We can't talk to Shakespeare. He's not there. But the dramaturg might offer a political, social, cultural context. The director has a lot to do. So the dramaturg might support it in that way. Play development dramaturgy, especially when it's a new play. Being a respondent, being a listener, listening to what the playwright envisions and what can you do to help support that. In this case, it's a new play, but the first production dramaturg was, I think, Sidney Mahone. Is that right? Pearl was Sidney. So also Sidney Mahone is also one of my great mentors. So it was really great to sort of be able to follow in her steps and be at this latter end of the development. But at that time, Sidney really working closely with Pearl and helping Pearl, and supporting her to cultivate her vision. So it depends on what it needs. This is a dramaturg's dream for me because we have the playwright in the room.
Yeah.
It's amazing because one thing as a dramaturg I also get to do, even when the play is up and the cast knows what they're doing and everyone's been sort of, educated and informed, I still get to be a bridge builder. I still get to talk to the audience. I still get to deal with community engagement. But I've been in the room with Pearl, and I've been able to hear what she intended, what she meant, what messages she wants to transmit. So then when I do the other part, I can do that on her behalf.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you note that dramaturgy is different depending on the show, because sometimes you just need research. Sometimes you just need the positioning of the play. Sometimes you need to just understand these characters, and it just having someone that's their focus, that's what they can do. They can provide that context. It helps an actor tremendously. It helps a whole team tremendously, but specifically in the actor's respect, it helps put them in the place to make those performances more real. And it's so important to have those. And what I want to just plug here, because the audience doesn't know, I read you guys' bios, a little clip of your bios, and the three of you have such amazing intersections already. But in terms of Maynard, you all three have a very deep connection to Maynard, in that we have someone who teaches and people who knew him, which I think is transcendent, honestly. I want to talk a little bit about
one of the things that Faedra said is so important, because the part of what a dramaturg does that I think is so valuable, and Sidney Mahone was the first dramaturg I ever worked with, first one I ever met. And I said to her when, they said she's going to be the dramaturg for the production, and it was Crossroads Theater that she was working with, and we were doing Flying West. And it's a play of mine that's set in the West. There were Black women pioneers going west, and she's going to be the dramaturg. And I said, great, what is a dramaturg? And she said to me, it really helps to put the play in context for the actors, for the director. It gives them a social political context for what was going on, gives them a feeling for where this play is taking place. And I love that, because that's so much of what a playwright does, is to figure out the context. Every play takes place at a certain time in a certain place. Where is that? What is the texture of that time and place? And oftentimes it doesn't all come forward in the play, because in the play would be 20 hours long. Okay. But the dramaturg preparing the kind of packet and research information that Faedra does and that Sidney does, it puts the actors in a frame of mind where they not only know what that specific play is, but they know what the play is trying to do in the context that the playwright was thinking about when the playwright wrote it, which is so important to making that play come off the page and come alive for the audiences that come to see it.
I love that you, as a playwright, were like, what's that?
I was nervous. I was like, what does that mean? What does it mean? And it was very helpful, because it's new there. I didn't know anything about dramaturgs. I majored in theater, majored in playwriting, but it's a relatively new development. And I think it's really important and wonderful that we're able to bring that kind of brain into the production and into the rehearsal hall to make that context come alive.
Yeah. It's not just you get a script and then you get on stage. A lot of people think that that's all it takes to produce live theater. And it's like, no, it's so much more. Like we as the artists have to find out who these people are. We have to understand these people, because we have to become these people. We need to understand the area. And in a show like Something Moving, it's talking about Atlanta. We are in DC. So it's very, very different worlds and very different circumstances and very different experiences. So that dramaturgy helps to just put you into Atlanta without actually having to be in Atlanta. And it's so helpful and so important. And I love that, Faedra, that you honored Sidney. We love Sidney. Yeah. We do love Sidney. But it's important to note that in this process of new play works, it's not just one person, right? Like you have the playwright who wrote it, and then this team of people that come in and help to build this. And so having two separate dramaturgs on this same show, it could have given you, Pearl, so much more to work with, just having two separate perspectives of the same time and your own personal perspective of that same time period. So super helpful. And I did not realize that it was fairly a new thing. When I was in school, you could take a course to learn how to be a dramaturg, which maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, That's funny because I think about that when I started working with Sydney. That was many, many years ago. But in Europe, it's been around for a long time. But in terms of American theaters, it's still a luxury. A lot of theaters don't hire and have dramaturgs, and so it's still a luxury. But the lovely thing about the collaboration, that's the beauty of theater also, because no matter what, I've been the dramaturg on the same play for different directors, and the work, research, and conversations around the table entirely different. And it's about honoring what that vision is, right? And so that's the beauty of theater. You can see the same play over and over, different people, it's a different play.
Yeah.
But this is the world premiere, so this one is very, very special.
It's it. It's it. I want to talk a little bit about Maynard as we move into the rest of the conversation. He grew up in a family and a community that valued civic activism and education. And a lot of our themes for our supplementary programming for this show are focused on civics and community engagement and how to follow in the footsteps, basically. So, Hilary, could you talk a little bit about the history of the Black schools in the urban South and how that cultivated the legacy of civic activism?
Thank you. One of the things that I love about African American schools at this time, like Maynard Jackson, most people don't know what is going on in these classrooms during the time because we see Jim Crow and we know Plessy and we assume everything's bad. That the teachers aren't well educated, they're not prepared, and that the children are learning to be substandard citizens of the nation. And that is completely not true. Those are all myths, because one of the things from once African Americans are able to create schools without punishment, without fear, and without the law telling them no, they are creating schools that are civically minded. You are to become educated and educated people to support the community. It is always civic minded. You are to use your education for the benefit of all and the uplift of all. So, one of the things about the public schools in Atlanta, but also the urban South, that would be different than a rural community because you have Black middle class leaders, because you have institutions, because you have support from outside, you could get a 9-month school year in Atlanta. And what you're learning in the classroom, you're taught by largely educated HBCU graduate women and sometimes men who are also having what they call the HBCU spirit coming into the classroom. But more importantly, they also understand without education, you can't challenge Jim Crow. And they teach in civics along the way. And one of the things is how to become an informed voter, how to challenge voting rights, how to engage politically without the ballot. They are incubators for activists. So one of the things I always think about is during this time is that Carnegie Woodson, the father of Black history, the one who comes up with, we think about it, Black History Month, without those schools and without those teachers in the classroom, we wouldn't have civil rights activism as we know it, because the teachers are the parents, they're the mothers of the community, they are the Sunday school teachers, and they're going to make sure everyone is learning the same thing. You are something. This is just our temporary space in terms of our life, but we are the fight, and we're to fight for one another. And the way to do this is to become grounded in civics. So once we have a chance to learn and to be able to exercise our vote, we can, but how to persist and how to resist Jim Crow segregation. And that's one of the things about the power of the schoolhouses at this time that I think Maynard Jackson is reinforced from home, church, and school, all reinforcing that same message. And I think that's so key for today. It's not the responsibility of just the schools, it's not responsibility of just the families, it's all of it working together. And that's one of the things about this period. I think Maynard Jackson, he's a product of his entire education, both formal and informal.
Yes, that village mentality, right? Like it's not just your mom and dad, it's those adults that you interact with in the streets, it's your teachers, it's your church, your clergy, it's everybody all working towards one goal. And I think that's so interesting because I don't know that that's something that we do up here. Even though Maryland is a southern state, like I can't say civics was something that was pushed until I was like in college. You know, that wasn't something that you were worried about. It's something that was bred into you. You just knew you were supposed to do these things. And being Black in America, it's even more like we stick together. We're doing this together because it's all of us against. That's the mentality. All of us against, right? Yeah, I don't think that that's something that is as pushed here in these northern states. It's kind of like one man. You might end up in the politics, but it's every man for himself. Get there.
It's the we mentality versus the me mentality.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that his education really brought to the fore. What is that collective we? What is that collective good? And how can I be part of the movement going forward?
Yeah.
I think too that his that what you were just saying about against, like all of us against the same thing. I think the thing about his candidacy and his election was that we were all for the same thing.
Mhm.
That it didn't have to be a pushing against. We're angry, we're mad, we're gonna keep you out because you kept us out. It wasn't that. It was more like we're all here together. We're going to make this city great, all of us together, rich people, poor people, Black people, white people, whoever is here, we're going to come together rather than we're going to come together against something. We were coming together for something, to make a change in the city, to make the city different. And I think that's the kind of community and civic involvement that Hilary's talking about, where it's the every institution in the Black community was necessary and present to create a person like Maynard Jackson. His family was certainly pivotal in that, but they were so involved in the community, that they were so involved in what school was he going to. And then when he got to Morehouse and Dr. Benjamin Mays was there, to really inspire these young Black men with an idea about what it meant to be a free Black man. What did that mean? And that you didn't have to be angry all the time. You didn't have to be shaking your fist all the time. You had to know what you were talking about. You had to say it and say it loud, but that you were in the process of creating something good, so that you were inviting people in rather than trying to find a way to keep people out, which was a very different thing for a deep South state, for a former slave state like Georgia, and for a city like Atlanta. That was in the midst of just trying to make that transition from segregation into the new world. And there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of confusion. And Maynard was able to really rise above all of that and say, we can do this together. We have to relax, we have to learn how to talk to each other, and we have to do this together. And it doesn't seem like such a radical idea now, but it does in a sense, because it's the same thing. We have to figure out a way to make the country work together. Otherwise, it can't work at all. So that I think part of the value of looking at a character like this, at a figure like this in our history, is that it does give us a living, breathing moment when we came together and did something right and did something good, and it worked for everybody. That we had great business we were doing. We had a great airport that is still the busiest airport in the world. And it had unprecedented levels of Black involvement, as he would say, at the drop of a hat. Every step of the way, came in on time, under budget, and with unprecedented levels of Black involvement. All of us who worked for him knew that by heart. We would say it. But that was important because it meant that the myth that if you let Black people run something politically, it's all going to be terrible. Atlanta said, that's not true. Look at this. Look at how wonderful this has been. And we all did this. And you can't argue it when you have planes coming and going every 2 seconds out of the Atlanta airport.
And I think that's one of the things with his education, though, that you can have these institutions. He learned coalition building, but he also learned debate. He learned how to engage with diverse people in there. And I think that's one of the things he brought to the fore. He cultivated the arguments to imagine a new world with support of people around him. And that phrase, under budget, my students, I have them repeat it, and they're like, how do you do that? But that's okay. It's one of those things where Maynard represented a lot, and it's that foundation, generations of education that pushed into him, that he's the greatest symbol of it, because he reflects all of what Atlanta hoped for and aspired for generations, and what the schools and his family and civics education prepared him for it.
One thing that you said, Pearl, that I think is so important. You absolutely set up my segue, which I love. But one thing you just said that just like went for me was, this mentality of like there's the people that feel like it's us against, and then there's the people that are like, nah, we should be just saying we together. And that's coming from a Black person, a Black man, nonetheless, at that time to have that mentality of, y'all, we're not. We need to be working towards something. We need to be building legacy. We need to, which Lincoln connection there. We need to, which is why Pearl's play is so perfect for this place. But like the whole concept that Black people are not a monolith, and that we all do not think the same way, and we do not all have the same generational trauma response to certain things. I think it's so important to speak on that, because Maynard was a revolutionary at his time, and we today, especially with how we are going through, or are in, or have gone through, depending on your personal opinion of society right now, this racial reckoning that we are back in. There's these mentalities where you have people, your own family, where you may feel one way and they feel another, and that is okay, and we can still figure out how to move forward. And I think that's so important, that even then there were people like Maynard thinking about that. But my segue here, you all have talked about, memory, and how do we remember people, and, being there and what it felt like. And one of the things that I think, and we think here at Ford's is amazing, and we want to illuminate in this conversation today, is that for every moment in history, there are the facts that happened, historical memory of how it happened, and then how we understand it and how we are interpreting it, and then the greater overall storytelling. So if you think about all of those things, and how all of those things help to define and develop your positioning, how does this all become a part of the national narrative? Like, all of you all are welcome to answer this question, but like, what makes telling historic stories like the one, like Pearl show, Something Moving, what makes it so compelling? Like, why telling it on stage why does it make it so compelling on stage, so powerful? That was long. I hope you all
No, I will start as the historian. And as a historian who I don't research the big people. I don't research the popular American myth of great white men and white women. I look at the Maynard Jacksons. I look at the people who supported him. I look at even the women who were on welfare in Atlanta, who had Maynard Jackson stay in their apartment to eliminate what the plight of working class Black women were. One of the things I look at is who's telling the story, and for what purpose does the narrative being told serve. And this is where what we've gotten before in history was, before Maynard Jackson, this is where his schools are important. He's not getting what the United Daughters of the Confederacy wants him to get. They're going beyond the textbook. They're going beyond into the lived experience. And by telling through plays, I am reminded of how I came to African American history. And sometimes the power of storytelling and what is history doesn't just simply rely within academic historians and the profession, because they establish facts. But up until 1970s, those facts didn't include or can explain how Maynard Jackson emerges and gets elected. So think about that historical creation and who's creating it and for what reasons, but also the power of storytellers, and whether they're novelists, people in theater. I think about Alex Haley's Roots for all of its issues. That helped push the narrative. It wasn't historians who pushed the narrative of hope, who dreamed another world, who weren't relying on, oh, can I footnote this? It was the imagination and using history and telling a story in a compelling way that whets our appetite to learn more, including why did I not learn about Maynard Jackson and the hope that was embedded in his campaign in 1973. what did the historians not tell me, and for why did they not tell me?
Mm.
And that's where I think the power of storytelling. So I don't see it as oppositional in what I'm doing with what Pearl and others are doing. I call it, when we go back to history, it's storytelling. It's just, which story are we telling?
Mm.
I
Pearl,
think it's
Faedra?
very true. And I think that part of what we're looking at is what actually happened, which historians can tell us. And what I'm always trying to do as a creative artist is, how did it feel to be there when that was happening? So that what I wanted to create was a platform for storytelling, for these imaginary Atlanta citizens to be able to come forward and say, this is how it felt for me as a working class person. This is how it felt for me as a Jewish woman. This is how it felt for me as an indigenous man. This is how it felt for me as a young Black man. So that they have a way of moving in and out of, okay, we're actors telling you something, into the voices of imaginary but fully imagined people who might have been in Atlanta at that moment. Because knowing what happened is only made complete by how it felt to be there. You know, you can tell me how many votes Maynard won by and what precincts he carried and all that, but I also want you to tell me, what did it feel like on election night when we looked at each other and said, oh my God, we actually elected him. You know, I grew up in a political family. I had worked in political campaigns my whole life. My father ran for governor, ran for city council, ran for school board, never won anything. So that no candidate I had ever worked for had won. And then when Maynard won, I was kind of taken aback by that, because that means now you got to run it. You won it. Now you got to run it. That's a whole different thing. But it really, I think, is what you're saying about storytelling is so critical to me, because that's what I'm always trying to do, is tell the story. Let people get involved in the story, and then they will want to know more because they care about that character. They care about that story. They see themselves in a personal story. Because there's a wonderful quote from Frantz Fanon talking about going to the movies when he was very young, and he had seen, you know, so many movies with white characters only. And he said, but every time the lights would go down, I would look for me. And I always think of that as a playwright. You know, when the lights go down, I want everybody in that theater to see themselves on that stage. And I think that's one of the things that was important to me in writing this play, was to have a cast that reflects what America looks like. So it can't be an all Black cast or an all white cast. Yeah. It has to be a cast that is reflective of what we look like now. And that was very exciting for me, but also kind of nerve-wracking, because I've only before ever written plays with all Black casts. Now I had to figure out, how do I deal with a Mexican-American person? How do I deal with an Asian-American person? And that's part of the challenge of doing the work that we do, is to challenge yourself to tell it better, to get the story straight. You know, my grandmother was always talking about, be sure you tell the story straight. And that's the whole thing. Tell it, let people tell their stories. And if they see themselves, they will never forget that. Because we all remember that time we first saw a play, read a book, saw a film where you said, oh my God, that's me, that's my family. That's what my community looks like. Raisin in the Sun did that for me. Like, oh my God, I want to write a play like that, because it was so about my neighbors and my neighborhood. And I think that's why the historians and playwrights, it's such a natural mix, because we're all trying to tell the story in the way that we know how to tell it.
And can I just add a personal thing in how I got introduced to Maynard Jackson? Eyes on the Prize.
Yes! Come on, PBS.
Eyes on the Prize 1, but 2, that went up to Harold Washington.
That's amazing.
The first time I saw that, I'm from Boston. I saw the Boston Bussin' events that my parents talked about because they experienced it. But that was my first time getting introduced to Maynard Jackson, was to see him on screen, see that very meaty clip on him. Like, it was a great section up there. But then also, I knew the Atlanta airport. I'm like, oh, that's the Jackson in this. So it was that compelling storytelling. I didn't read about officially Maynard Jackson as a scholar until I got to college. So sometimes storytelling whets the curiosity before you can get the formal learning. And that's one of the things I love about who's doing the telling and for what purposes. And I think sometimes the work of the historian and others should be more in collaboration rather than intention, because we're all about getting to have people see themselves in the history and telling fuller, inclusive narratives that are compelling.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I just want to celebrate Pearl, what she's doing here, because for me, I never really separate theory and practice. This is just they're very much integrated in the best of times. And for Pearl to give us substantial history and information in rehearsals, actors as themselves saying, wow, I'm learning something. And giving me the opportunity to learn things I thought I knew I didn't know, but to do it in such an artful, poetic, lyrical way. So I want to underscore the way she wants us to feel, because something moving moves me. And I've seen it and heard it many times now. It moves me. It makes me think about the possibilities, but yet she's doing this gorgeous thing with this contrapuntal narrative, this different voices, a collage, a quilt of these different people. Isn't that the best way to tell history versus a singular, perspective? So artfully, this collection filling in the history, and so it's done beautifully. And this is why I think theater, matters, and theater is electric and dynamic because it can transmit these ideas in such a visceral, embodied, felt way.
Yeah. See, it's so important to always have history and memory and art come together and converge. And I again, Erica opinion. This is the Erica opinion. It's frustrating to me when people separate the three, because how? Like, how can you rationalize separating the three when they are all storytelling? They are all a part of the fabric that makes us who we are. It's so important to continue, because as this show is a world premiere here at Ford's, but it's good. You've already laid your legacy, Pearl, so it's going to continue, and people are going to come back to it. And everyone, our viewers, everyone has had the same reaction that Faedra and Hilary are having, where they're going, I didn't know that. All of our actors are on stage going, I didn't know that. That was him. It's so illuminating and such a wonderful way to digest history. I always harken back. I'm not gonna say that it was my aha moment because I was already in theater, but seeing how they did Hamilton that way made me go, oh,
yeah,
this is such a digestible and fun way to take in history. I didn't care what those people looked like. I didn't care that they were people of color representing our nation's white people. But just inserting it in that way made me go, let me go look up Aaron Burr. Who is he? Let me go look this person up. And that's what I hope that all of our viewers who watch this and see all three of you lovely women speaking about positioning, then come see the show and then go look up I want them to Google you, Pearl. I want them to Google all of y'all. I do, because it's so important that we continue to have these stories told. And it's why Ford's started our legacy commission. There are too many stories like this where you go, oh, that was that person. So
I also think that's true, that we want people to learn about these things. We want people to know these things, but it's theater. We also want them to have a good time. We want them to laugh. We want some love story in there. We want something where at the end you don't feel like, okay, I suffered through it, but now I know more.
Right.
It's like, that's not what this is. What we're trying to do is to say these stories are vibrant and rich. I mean, Hamilton is such a great example. Where it's like telling stories that certainly these were white people who were living these stories at this moment. But if we're going to make them American stories, if we're all going to say we are Americans now, we're all free people, and we're going to be free American people, people, then we all get to claim those stories. We all get to tell those stories. And I think that's so important for us to be able to say the words that Alexander Hamilton said, the words that George Washington said. We as Americans get to claim the good part of that. And we get to fuss about the bad part. You know, what about those slaves, George? What about that? What about that? But we also get to say what a beautiful document the Constitution is, what a beautiful document the Declaration of Independence is, and that if we are Americans, we get to claim that. We get to read it through our own glasses, through our own filters, but we have to claim it, because otherwise we're going right back to what you were talking about before, Erica, which is it's like we're separating out. This is what white people did. This is what Black people did. It's like, let's cut that out. Let's say this is what America is. And there's some parts of it that are so horrible, it makes you weep and run out in the street when you read about it. And some parts that are so wonderful, you weep for the joy of what human beings can do when we do it right, when we get together. And that's what I always want people to see. There are certainly all of these extremes, but in the middle, there's all of us being Americans together. And I didn't feel that way all my life. I was raised in a Black nationalist separatist household, and we were not feeling that American thing. And then Barack Obama got elected, and Michelle and those two little girls moved in the White House. And I had to say, wow, then that means that I have to claim that. I have to claim that. Claim that election. I have to claim what it means to elect a president and figure out what my role is to support that president as a citizen. And that's part of what the play is trying to look at too. What is that exchange? Not just who is the big person at the top, who's that leader at the top, but who are all those people who not only elected that leader, but who still have a responsibility to give that support, to be talking to that leader all the time, and not to cast a vote and go home, which is what so many of us do. And we can't do that. We have to stay engaged.
I'm so glad that you mentioned my forever first president, Barack Obama. Because it's the same thing, right? Like that was my generation's Maynard Jackson, was getting to do, and I know because I have been working with you, Pearl, that you were a part of Maynard's campaign. You sprinkled in there earlier that you have worked on campaigns, but you were there with him. And so I feel so connected in that way. All of us millennials who, when Barack Obama was running for president, that was our first big time to vote. You know, we were babies in the voting game. And I remember what that felt like to see someone that looked like me, and to see a Black woman with her beautiful hair and those little girls with those braids in that house. And how I remember my grandmother, who has recently passed, I remember she had dementia, but she was very lucid when Obama got elected. And I remember on inauguration day, her sitting up and being like, I never thought I would see this happen. I never thought. She was 90. She was 92, 93. You know, she's like, I never thought I would see this happen. And what that feels like to watch someone else achieve what has been told to us is impossible. And how no matter, even though it's not you, you feel the same connection to that person, because you're like, he did it, we did it. So, you know, it's, I know, and I hope that many of our viewers who are watching, who were there when Barack Obama was elected president, can tie that feeling to when they come to see something moving, can tie that feeling of, I was there too, you know, and how did that feel, and what did that look like? And then to be here in DC when we got a first Black president, oh my God. Goodness, that was insane. But
the challenge too is that we have to figure out a way to translate the good feeling that we have because we're as African American people, when we elect an African American person to an office for the first time, we have to widen that so that we don't only have that feeling about African American candidates. We have to be able to find good candidates, and that's part of that regarding ourselves as Americans, that we're still in the hyphenate stage, where we're talking about this kind of American, but it's like, let's get rid of the hyphens and see what would happen if we're all Americans. And when I went to do my first residency at the Alliance Theater, which is a big regional theater, that is not a Black theater in any means. And when I first went there, it was even less of a Black audience in that institution. And I was really worried about, I'm an independent Black playwright, how can I go to this big white theater? And my husband listened to me for a while, and then he said, "You're looking at this all wrong." So of course you never want to hear that from your husband. Like, why do you think you know better than me? What do you mean? And he said, "You're a great American playwright going to work at a great American theater. Every time you get ready to say Black or white, say American to yourself and see if it makes any difference. If it's necessary to say African American, then say it. If it's necessary to say white, say it. But if it's not, say American." And I did that as an exercise for myself for 2 weeks. And it was amazing how different I felt about some things that I had been used to thinking about through a completely racial lens. And when I could say to myself, we're all on the same side of this. Let's believe that we do have best intentions, and let's see if we can be Americans together without starting off like this. Let's see if we can start off like this, and how wonderful would that be? So that I think we'll get there, but we're in a transition phase where we identify so strongly racially that we're not always prepared to take those same good, energetic, passionate feelings towards someone else who may be a Mexican American, who may be a Chinese American, a Vietnamese American, a white American, whoever it is. What are they talking about? Are they standing up for me? Do they care about working people? Do they care about police brutality? What are they going to do for me as an American citizen? And then the exchange can take place in a much wider way, so we don't have to wait for a Black candidate. We can love a Black candidate and have all that racial love that's there, but we can also have an American love for a system that is in danger right now. It's a wonderful way of people getting together to govern themselves.
Can I just say something? But Pearl, that's what I think Something Moving does, right? Because you have created this work and you have illuminated that Maynard Jackson, yes, he went to an HBCU, first Black mayor, Alpha Phi, these important, significant things. But your play shows he was voted by the people, right? And the voices in it speak to this holistic, American, unified, going for, not against energy that is so amazing. And that's how he got in office, right? And so your play is moving us to remember that as well.
And that's why I think it's about hope. How do we have a radical form of hope and love? And the fact that, and I think all the time when I always teach Maynard Jackson to my students, I tell them, like, he is the Barack Obama of the 70s. Like, when you think about Maynard Jackson, you think this way. We talk about here. But how did they both do it? They had coalitions that crossed the traditional lines of division, which is intentional because it's easy to sustain power. People are fighting one another. But it's based on hope, love, and seeing the commonness of we're all Americans, we are all Atlanteans, but also the idea, yes, we can.
Yes.
To overcome even the thought of the past that, what is this impossible? What's going on? Because we've been traumatized. In both cases, they say, yes, we can do this. And then the question is, what do you do next? How do you sustain that? Yes, we can. How do we exchange and looking at one another and building coalitions? And that's one of the things that I see past and present is how communities responded, and those connections just didn't stop with the casting of a ballot. And that's something that's important too, is that how do you sustain that hope and that vision that got you to the point? But what's the next day look like? And as I tell my students, you can have a day to celebrate, and after that, it's back to work.
Back to work.
But back to work with some people you know are your allies.
Yeah. You guys are making my interviewing so easy. I love this. I'm going to ask this question because not often, well, maybe often, I don't know. I feel like the timing of this show is kismet right now. It's so apropos to what is going on in the world right now. we are literally looking at, voting rights being obstructed again. Georgia is literally at the center of this national conversation about the election process right now. And we've had panelists that we've called for other talks that are like, I gotta go to Georgia. I can't be there because I gotta go to Georgia, which we absolutely are like, please go fight that fight. And then when you're done, come back and see this show. But this has, I mentioned, for me being the new millennial voter, we didn't have that same issue, but having the voting rights being obstructed and seeing that people want to keep people from their given right to cast votes yet again in 2023. This has we have a whole new group of young voters coming in that could make or break our next election. This is all negative impact on those young humans, and it breaks my heart to see. So I'm wondering if you lovely women have any advice on how people can take these lessons of Maynard, of my forever first president, Barack Obama, and support voter turnout today. Like, how can we say, block the BS, y'all, like, get out there. So, anyway, whichever one of you wants to jump in, please.
I think it's the thing that I always remember is my friends in SNCC, in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, always used to say, freedom is a constant struggle. Freedom is a constant struggle. It's not like we struggle till Tuesday, then we go home and do something else. It's like it's a constant struggle. And sometimes you're on the uphill side of that mountain and everything is going great. And you feel like, oh, this is wonderful. We won, we won, we won. But the thing is, it doesn't stop, because it's more like this. It's peaks and valleys, because we're always up against people who don't want to move forward, who are afraid that moving forward is going to take something from them. And it takes a long time for people to realize that expanding something doesn't mean taking something from you. It means expanding so that everyone has what you want, because we all want that. We want a good job. We want a house. We want a place to grow old in peace. We want to fall in love and get married and have children and sit on the front porch and drink lemonade and wave at our neighbors and all those very, very old-fashioned things. But it's because we understand that freedom is a constant struggle. And for young people who are cynical about politics, I say, get over that. Until you have a better idea for me, vote. And when you have a better idea, come and tell me. And I'm all down for that. But until you have a better idea, don't just sit home, because that's not helping you. It's not helping me. And it's not moving the country forward. My mother used to say that demonstrations were important, not just to show the people in power how many of us there were, but to show each other how many of us there were. So that when something happens and we all pour into the street because we are horrified at what happened to George Floyd, because we think it's insane for the Supreme Court to take back a woman's rights to choose what's going to happen to her own body. When people pour into the streets, we showed them, but we looked around and said, look at how many of us there are. What does that mean? What can we do? And what we do is, when we realize that there are that many of us, it helps us get stronger. It helps beat back that cynicism that, oh, it doesn't matter what we do. Because it does matter what we do. Who gets elected determines who's on that Supreme Court. I tried to talk to young women about that and say, you're of childbearing age. I'm past all that. You need to be aware of what Roe v. Wade is and how hard we fought for that and how easy it is to take it back. How hard we fought for voting rights and how easy it is for a bad court to take that back. But if you understand that freedom is a constant struggle, then you find joy in that struggle. You find joy in meeting your neighbors and saying, okay, I'm going to vote, but I'm also going to take 2 of my neighbors with me. Who doesn't believe in voting, I'm going to make her with me and promise to take her to lunch after. I'm going to take all the young people on my block and make them hand out literature and go to the polls. I'm going to do little things that I can do. Learn the mailman's name. Ask him if he's going to vote. Talk to the people across the street, because it doesn't have to be a 10,000 person thing that you do. Maybe you take 2 people, maybe you take 4, and then they take 4, and then they take 4. And it becomes bigger that way. But it has to be something that you accept is going to be a part of your life. Being an activist isn't something you pick up and put down. It's a part of your life, and there's a joy in it. I also tell young people there are no better love affairs than those that happen in a movement. You know,
Hey,
you two girl together, and then you get to drink wine and go home with this person and fall in love. Oh my God.
that part.
Is that? How wonderful is that? And it's true. So that we all can have an optimistic way of looking at what this struggle is and understand that it doesn't have to be all Black folks on one side, all white folks on the other side, men on this side, women on this side. It's good people who understand what that means to be a good human being on one side, trying to convince the people who don't really understand what it means to be a good human being, to show them what it means and to put in place programs that allow that humanity to come through. So it's don't be cynical. I understand that, you know, Barack Obama being your first president, I love you for it, because I was dancing around that night too, all of us. You know, I remember wonderful pictures of John Lewis, who was jamming on election night. He was dancing around because the joy was there, and the joy should be there. But sometimes, you know, an election is not going to be joyful and wonderful and dance at the end. It's just going to be a hard slog, but your candidate is a good person and is going to do some good work. Yeah. So everybody isn't a charismatic like Barack or Maynard, but people are hard workers. And if they're going to do the work that benefits you and your community, vote for them. Yeah. Vote for them. Help them. Take somebody to the polls and do what has to be done. We can do it. We've done it. We changed the country. This is a country that used to be where it was legal to buy and sell and breed human beings. Oh. And we got rid of that. So it's like we can do anything, but we have to have the will to do it. You know, we could house every homeless person in this country. We could feed every hungry child if we had the will. And we need leaders who articulate that will, and we need to be the ones who demonstrate that will. We can do it.
And that's one of the things is about it's an everyday movement. But one of the things I've been paying attention to and why we're seeing all these backlashes, these elections are getting closer and closer in states that used to be givens.
Yes.
Like I'm in North Carolina, we're talking about less than 1% sometimes of vote, making a difference between who gets elected or not. Every vote counts. Yes. So one of the things I always stress to my students is not just go educate you on the process, because one of the things I've been seeing a lot, the courts are deciding up until the last minute. What is the process? So if you know you need to get ID, I've taken people to the DMV because they don't have a card to get their voter ID. If it's like if they're registering to vote and they have to vote absentee ballot, like what are the dates? When do you need it? Does it have to be gone to a notary? Oh, you can't. You know, there's a notary on campus. If you have to have like all those processes to get them ahead of time, that they're not caught at the end. And then more importantly, I always tell my students, I'm like, okay, I got a car. Meet me here. You can't drive over there.
Gotcha.
This is my time. We'll get in the car. I'll drive you there. I'll be outside when you're done. Come out. Come back in. But we have to literally take people to the polls when polling stations are so far away from them. So let's eliminate the obstacles to get people who don't want to stay. The long lines, take advantage of early voting, take advantage of knowing what your rights are. And I think the instructions show those in power who want to stay in power are so fearful because they know what we can do when we have Maynard Jackson, Barack Obama, and others who were seen as impossible. And then the other I always say is we need to speak to those who came before us and ask them, how did you move forward over time? And I remember young age talking to my dad who grew up in Jim Crow segregation. I'm like, what was it like to vote your first election after being unable to? What does that look like? What was those processes? We're hearing the stories by people who look like me, but also the elders in the community who are still alive and sometimes at the forefront still of these movements. And if they could do it 40 years, 30 years or more, I could have a bad election year and it's okay. Keep on fighting for the next candidate who's going to do good for everyone else.
And I just want to add what Pearl's play explores and what we've talked about a lot in rehearsal, that, you know, extraordinary people are ordinary people who do the extra thing, right? They do the extraordinary thing. And so what Hilary and Pearl are talking about is like, we can be galvanized. No, and we don't have to be the award-winning playwright and award-winning historian. We everybody can be the storyteller. So I think about, I have a 16-year-old and I have a 20-year-old. My 16-year-old's in high school, and she's in the classes that make her really aware. And we talk about things a lot at the table. My husband listens to all the news channels, so he knows what everyone is saying, right? But that kind of awareness, what are the storytellers saying? And my son, who's at Hampton and HBCU, he's activated in a way he never was before because of the conversations that are happening at that institution and with his peers, right?
Yeah.
Again, molding these sort of leaderships and what are the issues. And he's coming home and thinking about these things. And we're saying, talk to your friends, talk to people. We tell stories in many different ways now. There's still the old-fashioned talking to people, which is really good. And there's TikTok and there's social media, which can be troubling and which can be wonderful. So how can we counter? How can we get involved and navigate and use that? How can we take them to see a movie or a play that will get them talking about these things? So we all can be the galvanizers. We all can be the storytellers.
Yeah. I love that. When I was doing my campaign work, I actually volunteered to work with the polls. And my job when Barack Obama was in his candidacy was to register people to vote. And literally it was me at a table in the student center at my college. Hey, you come over here. I'll give you a cookie, register. You know what I mean? Like, it's as simple as that. It's as simple as I got up today and I wanted to make sure that I'm the person that volunteers to make sure the people in the line are okay. It's as simple as getting involved in that way. And I love I'm going to go and I'm going to bring 2 more. I love that. But yeah.
Absolutely. And, Pearl was saying, the words that were clicking, like being aware. The thing is, a lot of young people are not, ambivalent in terms of knowing the issue. They don't even know the issues.
Yes.
They have been living in a bubble. And as things are falling, they don't even realize the things that are at risk. So, they're 2 friends and they're 2 friends. And I love it.
And then also too, I'm not in the area, but for those who are in the area, please go see Pearl's play.
Please go see our play.
And if you can't see the play like I am, go to Eyes on the Prize, go to YouTube. YouTube has it. Type in Maynard Jackson, look at the 15 minutes. But if you're in person, this is how you start the conversation. Learn about people who inspired and what did it feel like when the impossible was done. Because I think now sometimes there's the skepticism and cynicism because people don't think their vote matters.
Yeah.
The example in storytelling and Pearl's play, and this is why I love this, the fact the play exists.
Yeah.
This is how you also convince people that the impossible dreams can matter.
So much. The reason I do this job is because I saw on stage someone that looked like me doing something that I thought I couldn't do. And here I am doing it today. And, it's so important. But the only reason I did is my mama took me. So, got to take the people. I'm going to ask, do you lovely women have any final thoughts besides go see the play? This is the moment now where you can leave our viewers with a pearl. All of it. I meant to do that then.
Just that you have the power, that you, the citizen, you have the power in a democracy. And that's why it's so important to fight for democracy, because you have the power as a citizen to craft that democracy, to craft that country into what we know it can be. So don't give away your power. That's the worst thing you can do. Claim it, use it, be it.
A pearl of wisdom from Pearl. Do we have a pearl of wisdom from Faedra? Do you have one?
So I just would leave with that echoing Pearl and be the extraordinary person. We all have that in us and do making change. Yeah. And again, I have to say the play, it's moving. It is funny. It is touching. So come see it.
Yeah. Hilary, one final.
One of the things, remember whose shoulders you're standing on. We take our vote for granted. Don't take your vote for granted. Participate, maintain hope, and move forward because you have the power.
Yes. Well, Pearl, Hilary, Faedra, thank you. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate this conversation. I loved it. I knew it was going to be this good, and I'm excited that it was this good.
Thank you, Erica.
Of course. We hope, now I have to do my real job. We hope that you at home enjoyed our conversation today. We will continue to respond to your Facebook comments and questions should you have them. This link will stay on our website forever. So you will be able to come back. You will be able to share it out to your family and friends, and we hope that you do. Please go get your tickets to See Something Moving, a meditation on Maynard here at Ford's Theater. You can do so by visiting our website at www.fords.org. It runs from September 22nd, that's this week, until October 15th. Also, I mentioned the left and right. I mentioned the Carol. While you're getting your tickets to come see something moving, you can also purchase your tickets and plan your visit back to Ford's Theater to come see A Christmas Carol, which will be running November 17th through December 31st, 2023. And if you are interested in more from our First Look series, you will be able to come to the second Ford's Theater Legacy Commission First Look to see some readings of the next collection of new works in our commission program set to grace our stage in January 2024. We absolutely hope to see you then. Please come. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.